Alright, last time I made a long ass intro and I noticed that most of you didn't like it. So this time, I'll go straight to the point. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Shadow the Axolotl, and I got wolves at my door waiting for my empire to fall. But without further ado, let's get into it already. This video will be an in-depth lore explanation, analysis, and theories about the god Alll-mer. As it stands now, I think most people have misguided opinions about him, and see Alll-mer simply as Fiend Hunger's evil Jesus knockoff. But, oh boy, I guarantee you he's way more than that. Don't worry, I will talk about Sulfur today.
What's up, baby? Did you miss me?
You cannot talk about Alll-mer without bringing up Sulfur, and vice versa. So before going straight to the analysis and theory crafting, let's begin by first getting everyone into the same page, and let me explain to you the lore of Alll-mer. Alll-mer was born a mortal man in the city of Jetetia. His origins, though, are reason for debate. Some sources say he was born from a virgin mother, which had the seed laid by a false god, whatever it means. While others tell a story about how a deity known as Vitruvia was ordered by the old goddess of creation, Sylvian, to design mankind in the image of Sylvian herself. The old goddess loved the results, but over time, Vitruvia noticed imperfections in her project. Being a perfectionist, she sought to create the ideal human being, and her effort resulted in the life of Alll-mer. Whichever is the truth, and we'll get into that later on, the stories agree that Alll-mer rose to prominence with his teachings of uniting all people from different religions and ideologies under the same umbrella. His goal was to bring back the old world order. This ideal resounded with 12 apostles that became loyal followers of Alll-mer. The kings and sultans of the time, which were new gods if you didn't know, would refuse to stay idle as such men with godlike posture threatened their rule. As a result, they sentenced Alll-mer to public humiliation and death on a cross. The pain and suffering pushed Alll-mer over the edge, and that triggered his ascension. I'm not kidding, he literally soared to the heavens in a T-pose, still being nailed into a cross and all. This ascension somehow caused him to go to Mahabri, the city of the gods, where he spent 3 days and 3 nights before returning. In Mahabri, Alll-mer carved idols of himself, with the intent of separating his unconscious side. Now, I need to clarify a few things. When Alll-mer divided himself, both sides, conscious and unconscious, fought each other, and the one that lost was discarded into a place known as the sulfuric pits and became the sulfur god. The side that won lost all his hair for some reason and is called Alll-mer in modern days, even though technically he's only half of Alll-mer, just like Sulfur. For this video, I think it's important we distinguish between the Alll-mer pre-split and the ones post-split. So I'll be referring to Alll-mer pre-split simply as Alll-mer, while the post-split ones will be Sulfur for the Engi half and Algiz for the bald half. Got it? Good, let's proceed. Algiz, again the side of Alll-mer that won, returned as an ascended god to 11 of his apostles and enacted vengeance upon the ones who planned his execution. Wait, weren't 12 apostles, you may ask? Yes, one of them left his side after what happened in Mahabri. Algiz demolished the new world order of the new gods and brought back the ways of the old order as his dad intended. In that process, he also raped and tortured a bunch of them. That's how he got the evil Jesus stigma, if you weren't aware. Let me add a paragraph here to explain to you what is Old and New Order. Old Order was the ancient time when the world was still ruled by the old gods. And New Order is any period of time ruled by new gods. Easy enough, right? But things get pretty confusing since Algiz established a new world order after the capital New World Order. The ideology of the old order is that humans are subservient of the old gods and should follow their rules. Meanwhile, in the new order, humans get to decide their own values and laws without being bound by the will of higher beings. Sounds good, right? Not exactly. Turns out humans aren't that good at creating their own rules, and especially at following them. So Algiz sought to bring back the ways of the old order and fix the chaos that was happening at the time. And he was to become the central religious figure. I like to call this period of time the New Old Order. Myro, Big M, if you are watching this, please Please clarify this in the future. In the new old order of Algiz, he ruled with an iron fist as the most prominent religious figure, until he disappeared without explanation some centuries later. After which, a new group of new gods came to be, and with them another new world order. Algiz was buried in the tombs of Mahabharata, and his influence diminished over time. But in the modern days of Fianhunger Termina, the worship of Algiz experienced a resurgence in popularity and is currently the main religion in the majority of the world. Alright, even with this long exposition, we have only scratched the surface of what Alll-mer is, and we are left with many open-ended questions. For example, which origin story is true? When Alll-mer split, which side won? Who is the missing apostle? And also, which god did Alll-mer use to fuel his ascension? We will answer all of those questions still in this video, but to better answer these lore-related questions, I believe we should first start an analysis of Alll-mer. So with that in mind, let's begin the second part of the video. Remember when I told you that Alll-mer is not simply just evil Jesus? Well, it's time for me to explain you what I meant. When we talk about the Jesus Alll-mer is based on, we're not talking about the theological Jesus, the Jesus as the religious figure, nor the historical Jesus, Jesus as someone from history, a real person. Rather, we are talking about Jesus as an embodiment of the self, as described by Carl Jung, the quote-unquote psychological Jesus. Alright, I have to make a quick disclaimer. I am not a psychoanalyst. I am at most a Max Derrat fan. And as a Max Derrat fan, I have watched his video series on the book Aion, where Carl Jung explores the ideas I am about to present. What I'm gonna do today is a simplification of the core ideas needed for today's video, so viewers with no prior knowledge of psychoanalysis can follow the rest of this section. Again, I am not an expert, but I will try to do my best to be accurate with the info I will provide. If you want an actual proper dive into Carl Jung's work, I recommend the aforementioned Aion series by Max Derrat. Especially for today's video, I suggest watching episodes 5 part 1 and 5 part 2, which I'll leave links for in the description. Now moving on. Why do I think Alll-mer was based on the psychological Jesus? And what even is that? Well, according to Jung's theory, the self represents the totality of the psyche. So, the conscious and unconscious parts of the mind. Jung also emphasized the concept of individuation, which is the process of integrating the unconscious parts of ourselves into our conscious awareness in order to become whole. In other words, individuation is the process for actualization of the self, and the self is the state of wholeness which all humans naturally strive for, or at least should. One of the reasons why Jung thought Jesus to be the archetype of the self is because Jesus represents the union of opposites. Another key element of Jung's theory, Jesus is both man and God, and according to Jung, the crucifixion and resurrection represent the transcendence of suffering and achieving of the state of self. In other words, by confronting the greatest darkness symbolized by the crucifixion, Jesus shone the brightest light and thus achieved divine status, symbolized by the resurrection. I bet you can already see the parallels being drawn here between Jung's interpretation of Jesus and Fianhunger's Alll-mer, but believe me, it goes even deeper. You see, there is a chapter in the Bible where... Alright, yeah, we're going to the Bible for this one. I mean, you should have seen it coming at some point. There is this chapter where Jesus is led by the Holy Spirit to spend 40 days in the desert in order to be tempted by the devil. I think that in a vacuum, this is a pretty strange idea. I mean, why would God send God to test God against the temptations of the devil? But if we take into account Jung's theory, we get an interesting, yet terrifying answer. Many religious scholars have upheld the doctrine that the Christian God is the summum bonum, that is, he's only good and contains no negative aspects. All that is evil is merely the absence of God, the absence of good. In fact, another common belief is that evil itself has no substance and does not exist. However, this notion that evil is the result of an accidental lack of perfection, aggravated Jung, who argued extensively against this. For the sake of this video, we won't get too deep into those criticisms, but what we need to know is that for Jung, the necessity for pairs of opposites is fundamental to any sort of development, and by denying these darker aspects of the mind, they are suppressed into unconscious, where they are sure to come back without our knowing and possess our actions. Jung believed that Jesus, as an archetype of the self, was not exempted of this fundamental duality, and also had a darker, unconscious aspect inside him. And the terrifying realization is that, according to Jung, the dark unconscious of Jesus manifested as the figure of none other than I hope this last segment wasn't that confusing. I understand if it is. I did condense a lot of information here. There's a lot I left out because I think if I bring it up now, it will just make things more confusing. But I hope it made you curious enough to want to learn more by yourself. Regardless, we shall finally address Sulfur. Let me just give you a quick recap of his lore, and let's continue with the analysis. When Alll-mer was in Mahabharat, he carved idols of himself and split his conscious side from his unconscious side. Both sides fought, and the loser was discarded into the sulfuric pits. Later on, Sulfur recruited cultists to do his bidding, which is basically indiscriminate murder. The Festival of Termina from the second game is issued by the moon god, but the Sulfur cultists hijacked it for themselves, and the bloodbath that happens there is now fuel for the return of the Sulfur god. The Church of Alll-mer in Prehevel is secretly worshipping Sulfur instead of Algiz, and maybe the Vatican is also involved in that mess, but we can't say for sure. If you have been following my analysis until now, you can already see what's about to come. There is no proper devil in the lore of Fiendhunger. The closest rendition of a devil we have is the Sulfur god. Heck, originally the Sulfur god was supposed to be a more Lucifer-esque being, but that interpretation of him was scrapped to instead support a more Jungian interpretation of Satan. Here's the cut dialogue I'm referring to. We revel in the blood of the sacrificial lambs. The masses are for slaughter, for the fallen god, the Sulfur god. Before the exodus of the gods, there existed one that was banished from the pantheon. As he was chained deep beneath the earth's surface, this fallen one, this fallen god, he was never able to leave this world. He exists beyond the eternal cycle and beyond the greater scheme of things. To celebrate the chaos, we gather souls for the fallen one. What I'm proposing is that the Sulfur god is Fiendhunger's devil, but a Jungian version of the devil instead of a theological one. If you're still not convinced, my dear viewer, I want you to check this. Directly from the Bible we have, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. And this is the martyr effigy, one of the 3 items needed to reach the Hollow Tower in Fiendhunger 2 and beat the game. The item description reads, a small effigy resembling crucified Alll-mer with a snake curled over him. It's carved from an unknown material. The description of the effigy is alluding to the fact that the devil is the evil aspect of the self, which in turn is represented by Sulfur, aka Satan, as the snake. I hope that after all of this, I have finally convinced you that the psychological Jesus of Jung is the inspiration Myro took for Alll-mer. So with that conclusion in mind, I want to answer a question you might have not thought of before. What Algiz and Sulfur are the gods of? Because we have the goddess of creation, we have the god of destruction, we have the god of order, we have the god of chaos, we have the god of depths, and the god of Fiendhunger. So what exactly is Algiz and Sulfur supposed to be? Just edgy Jesus and murder Satan? Doesn't feel right, does it? So let's get into that. Remember this clock? I talked a lot about it in my last video, but in short, it has 10 sigils, each one depicting a god. Last time I concluded that there was a balance between the gods of Fiendhunger. Putting it in more Jungian terms, you can say there are pairs of opposites happening here. For example, Under the sigil of Sylvan, the goddess of creation, there's the sigil of Grogroth, the god of destruction. The cat's already out of the bag, so I won't hide it anymore. The next sigil belongs to a god known as Turkil, but we don't know much about him really, so I think it's better if we skip him and Venushka. The sigil after those is Depths, and after it comes the sigil of a god named Sarko. There's good evidence that this god is supposed to be the god of stars and souls, but it's not the topic for the video, so let's leave it at that for now and let's return to the first sigil. Aion, the sun god, is the first sigil on the clock, followed by Sulfur, Algiz, and finally Rare, the moon god. For a moment, let's assume the clock's following an order of opposites, and I promise it will make sense later on. Why is that Algiz and Sulfur are between the sun and moon gods? To answer that question, we need first to answer what Algiz and Sulfur are the gods of. And to answer that, let's move away a bit from Jung and give room to another intellectual, namely Friedrich Nietzsche. That's probably not how you pronounce his name, but I don't know German, sorry. With the advancement of science and technology, religious doctrine was being supplanted by an age of reason. The problem is that one cannot use reason to formulate moral systems. Yes, I'm calling out some Harris. And the loss of respect for a higher state. The death of the symbol who inspired us to reach the self would have drastic results. This is the proclamation of the death of God Nietzsche is so famous for. And it's also represented by the ideologies of the old and new order in Fear and Hunger. With the loss of meaning and moral systems provided by religious belief, Nietzsche and Jung predicted two outcomes. One was the advent of totalitarianism, and the other is the advent of nihilism. And I think that is exactly what Algiz and Sulfur are the gods of. To further make my case, let's take a few lines directly from the games, and let's analyze them. From Craftman's notes found in the Church of Alll-mer, we have: the priest told me that everyone under the Ascended One share all possessions. Nothing's mine, nothing's yours. All is that of Alll-mer. What a mumbo-jumbo! That might work for the priest and all, but he's not the one doing these renovations under a strict schedule. And in Studies of Alll-mer 1, it says, but Alll-mer was to ascend. Arms still widespread from the cross he would soar, becoming the symbol we know today, turning his cross-ridden posture into something greater, a symbol of hope and domination. With his morning 11 apostles, he would murder the kings and sultans of the time, as was just, bringing back the old world order. The worship of Algiz is defined by the subjugation of any opposition. The quote-unquote abuse of power depicted in the stained glass is what Algiz represents, a god of domination, the god of tyranny. In fact, according to Jung, the sense of superiority is indeed the result of an inflated ego. So let's move on and inspect Sulfur and see if the opposite holds true, and he can indeed be equated to nihilism. Humans, the common people desperately putting their faith on these obsolete powers. They are ultimately alone in this world. There's no one looking after you if you were to return to that world. No one looking after you, but plenty of forces ready to exploit you down to the bone. The world you came from, where you were driven by where they want you and when they want you. You were just another pawn in the great scheme of things. Just another fool led by the so-called new gods, who are nothing more than dirty little sinners like yourself. The only difference being that they devoured the way to the top of the pyramid before anyone else had the chance. What do you call the starvation and poverty the world has faced? Horrible occurrences in history that were inevitable bumps on the path of progress? What would you call the last two great wars where hundreds of thousands, no, millions, perished? They were but a part of the great scheme. The sinners just pulling the strings from the grand hall they reside in order to further establish their position. That is vile, if you ask me. I trust no power to any man. Do you? Maybe what they say about absolute power really is the absolute truth. Maybe order and peace really are just a distant utopia. That's why we have chosen chaos. The philosophy of the Sulfur cult is to witness death, deal death, and finally experience death. which aligns with the nihilistic perspective. The cultists partake in a ritual where they first die, then experience the sulfuric pits, which feels like the scorching sun burning your skin, while the long tendrils of the cold freeze you from the inside out, and are revived once the intense pain has drained them of their last drop of humanity. This is what happened to Needles and Stitches, which are characters from Dawn's backstory. Just to drive the point of there being pairs of opposites going on, I will say that Sulfur is the god of anarchy instead of nihilism, but it's basically the same thing. After all, Perkele also says, "I trust no power to any man." After this long detour, I can finally explain to you why I think Algiz and Sulfur are between Ammon and Rare. By having Sulfur appearing right after Ammon, it drives further this idea of opposite pairings. One is the god of order, followed by the god of anarchy. The god of anarchy also comes right before his true opposite, totalitarianism, and the god of totalitarianism is in turn followed by the god of chaos. The old gods represent more universal concepts that transcend human nature. Meanwhile, ascended gods could represent human and social aspects of life. And I think that's the answer for the secret puzzle inside the clock puzzle. If you have been wondering why I called Bald Alll-mer Algiz this whole time, it's because it's the name of the rune used as his sigil. It's a Norse rune used to represent the union between human and divine, and it was inscribed to grant protection. The sigil of sulfur is the union for the alchemical symbols of sulfur and fire. It represents the wrath of the Christian God, as he made rain sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. Or maybe it could also symbolize hell. Okay, now this is over. Theory time! We will finally get to answer the questions I raised at the beginning of the video. Let's kick it off by finding out which side of Alll-mer won the split, which one became Algiz, and which one lost and became Sulfur. To answer that question, I think it's good if we first ask why did Alll-mer carve idols to separate his unconscious side? I thought a lot about it, and it only came to me while writing the script. But I think that when Alll-mer carved idols, he was manifesting his unconscious in the outside world. First, he gave his unconscious a shape, then a name, then its own identity, and finally distanced himself completely from it. As a result, his shadow and his ego became separate beings. In many ways, this could be considered the opposite of individuation. Instead of integrating his shadow, he rejected it, consciously at that. Alll-mer thought that by discarding his shadow, it would help him reach perfection, but instead, it created two flawed beings. One was shadow-possessed, and the other was his inflated ego. And based on the characteristics of each, I think it's safe to say that the ego became Algiz, while the shadow turned into Sulfur. From the Bible of Alll-mer, found in the Church of Alll-mer, it reads, "Eye for an eye leads to everyone being blind, but when everyone involved is blind already, there is very little to lose. Blind in your quest for power, I am blind in my quest for vengeance." From everything we've seen so far, the former must be Algiz, while the latter gotta be Sulfur. I also note that Algiz and Sulfur have one eye missing each, representing a blind spot in your judgment when you lose yourself to your ego or your shadow. Nice detail, Myro. There's one more thing to this segment I want to address. It's another theory of mine I wanted to fit in somewhere. I think the sigil of the cross belongs to the true Alll-mer, and it grants affinity with both Algiz and Sulfur. In Fiend Hunger 2, there are skill trees, and by inscribing sigils in the correct circles, we gain affinity with the god, and by doing so, we unlock their spells. When we do ending C, the ending of the Sulfur god, we are able to unlock the spell Longinus, which lets us equip a spear for the rest of the fight. But there is a similar spell, Blood Sword, that should, in theory, belong to Algiz, and we unlock it in the same branch. The skills for Alll-mer in Fear Hunger 1 are also very distinct. Phase Step allows us to teleport short distances. Walk on Water is self-explanatory, and Transmutation allows us to multiply bread and turn water into wine. They are references to the miracles that Jesus performed during his time, and most importantly, none of them is offensive. They are all peaceful utility spells. reflecting who Alll-mer was before splitting. The next theory we'll be answering is, which god Alll-mer used to ascend? As we may know, the girl absorbed the traces of the god of the depths to ascend into the god of hunger. Similarly, Logic has a cube inscribed with the sigil of Venushka, which is likely the god Rayla used to fuel her ascension. If we take it as a rule that an ascended god needs to absorb an old god to ascend, which god did Alll-mer use? If you have watched my previous video, I think it comes as no surprise that it was the sun god. There are many in-game hints supporting this theory. For example, in the skin Bible of Alll-mer, he is depicted crucified in front of a monstrance. If you don't know what a monstrance is, simply put, it is a sacred vessel used in more traditional Christian churches. The main thing to take from it is that it's shaped after the sun, and we have many more evidences. For example, the sulfur sun mentioned in Hugo's ramblings. The matches depicting Algiz with the phrase, "Let there be light," a statue of sulfur wearing a solar crown, and the party talk with Osa at the church of Alll-mer. Zeta on Discord pointed out to me that when you go to the pit of alignment in the past Mahabre, you can pray in a language that the player can't read, and you are teleported to the Hall of the Gods. This probably could be seen as a sun god spell, just like the book Passages of Mahabre that brings you to Mahabre when you read it. Similarly, Alll-mer has a blood portal spell that can be used as a teleport between his sigils. This blood portal could be a remix of the sun god spell that Alll-mer changed to be his own. Alll-mer ascending from the sun god also makes sense thematically, as there are many different sources connecting the figure of Christ with the sun. So in conclusion, Alll-mer absorbed the traces of the sun god when he ascended. Was Alll-mer born from a human mother, or was he created by Vitruvia? Before telling you which one I think to be true, first I want to point out what Enki says in the skin Bible of Alll-mer. On the surface level, these stories don't contradict with themselves too much. But on an ideological level, there are interesting differences. One story tells how a mortal everyday man rose to rival the powers of the older gods, while the other story makes Alll-mer just one more creation of the higher powers. The truth might lie somewhere between these stories, if you would ask me. The game never gives us a definite answer. However, I do have a theory I'd like to share today. According to the book Studies of Alll-mer, he was born from humble origins of a virgin mother, human origin with the seed laid by a false god, a god walking amongst men. Here is my proposal. I think that the virgin mother in this case is Vitruvia herself. Let it sink for a second. If Vitruvia created Alll-mer, wouldn't it be safe to say that she is his mother? Call me crazy if you want, but the text both in Studies of Alll-mer and in the Skin Bible of Alll-mer never directly states that his mother was a human. Only that he had human origins, and Vitruvia being the legendary progenitor of mankind fits that bill, doesn't it? This way I believe we can make sense of what Enki said, that the truth lies somewhere between the stories. Now, here comes the troublesome part of this theory. Who is the father of Alll-mer? And okay. No kidding. I think it's Grogoroth. Yeah. That Grogoroth. God damn it. Let's refer to the text again. Born from humble origins of a virgin mother. Human origin with the seed laid down by a false god. A god walking amongst men. And according to studies of Grogoroth, we know that he indeed walked amongst humans. In fact, we have a statue of Grogoroth as a human in the center square of Mahabre, and that statue is even mentioned in the New Testament of Alll-mer. So Grogoroth indeed passes as a god walking amongst men. Though the false god part from the Skin Bible of Alll-mer is what is strange to me. One can try to debunk this theory by saying that the false god has to be a new god, because in the text of the Skin Bible of the god of hunger, it says, "There are many popular texts that tell of a false god and a chosen human joining together in the darkest and wettest of dreams. The scheming false deity had hoped her daughter would be the light of mankind." And we know that the false god in this case is Nuven. So one can assume that the false god, that is the father of Alll-mer, is also a new god. But the reason I still think It's Grogroth, and not a new god, comes from a line from the priest enemies from Fiendhunger 1. Alll-mer is the most recent of all the older gods, but that is only because he made himself apparent at such a late age. He has existed for eons as a seed of his father. Quick disclaimer about this quote. We know Alll-mer is an ascended god and not an old god, but back in Fiendhunger 1, ascended gods weren't really a thing, so Alll-mer was classified as an old god back in the day. What I want you to keep in mind is the last line. He has existed for eons as a seed of his father. From the Skin Bible of Venushka, it reads, the seed of Grogroth had been fermenting for an eon, finally reached its maturity, and thus Sylvan pushed a whole pinecone out of her loose abyss and named her child Ninush. Ninush is the old name for Venushka if you haven't read the book. My theory is, Vitruvia somehow got the seed of Grogroth, which shouldn't be that hard considering the guy has literally dicks for horns, and used it to, I don't know, fertilize herself and give birth to Alll-mer. Somehow she used it, and that's how it came to be. If Alll-mer also had an Ancient One soul, like the girl did, this could explain how he got it. If this theory is true, and Grogroth is indeed the father of Alll-mer, then it could also explain why Alll-mer has the spells Blood Sword and Blood Portal, as blood magic falls under the domain of Grogroth. Now, real talk, even I am not 100% sure on this theory, so I'm basically just throwing random shit at the wall to see if anything sticks. I would like to hear your thoughts down below, so leave a comment of what you think is true, and use what I said as food for thought. Anyways, I think we're almost done. Let me just check the list real quick. Jungian analysis of Alll-mer, check. What are Sulfur and Algiz the gods of? Check. Which side was discarded into the sulfuric pits? Check. What traces Alll-mer used in his ascension? Check. What origin story is the correct one? Kinda check. What's left? Oh, right. Of course. The missing 12th apostle. Spread throughout the many realms of Rare are modes the player can interact with to make figures of themselves. If we do it for every single mode, for a total of 12 figures, we summon the 12th apostle. I stood next to your celebrated Christ, Alll-mer, the Ascended One, as he carved his idol. To condense his true essence, he carved that macabre being from the depths of his subconsciousness. To confront his shadow, the unknowable, the imperfection that obstructed his pursuits of absolution. As one, the Ascended One became two. That was when humanity finally reached the heights he had always strived for. Only, it was not two gods that mankind yearned for now, was it? If the other one had been dug deep within Alll-mer's subconsciousness, it had to be sent back just as deep, so it wouldn't obstruct the newfound order. Cast away, so that true absolution could be reached. Cast away deep, all the way down the sulfuric pits. This dialogue suggests that the man in black was with Alll-mer when he carved idols, but since the Alll-mer that left Mahabre was not the same that entered, the man in black abandoned his position as an apostle, and that's why only 11 were left. The man in black can also be recruited as a party member, but not exactly in the form you would expect. If you meet him in the rare realm of the woodsman's house, he confronts you. Another one hits my call. Just remember that you came to me, not vice versa. Tell me, O naive one, do you believe in pitch black darkness? As long as you answer that you don't support darkness or that you live for darkness, he says that he will help you. There is always a balance in everything a man represents. Good on one hand, and evil on the other. Good can come from bad, and bad can come from good. A constant struggle, a game even. I will aid you. I will lend you my sword and shield. Good and evil. With this dialogue, the man in black is talking about the self. He embraces it as the totality of the psyche and the principle of pairs of opposites of Jung. And once we leave the house, he joins our party as a goat. Kalev is a follower of the true Alll-mer, not Algiz or Sulfur. He sees them as imperfect, thus refuses to follow any of them.
This right here is my favorite thing, ever. In the history of forever. Now the main problem area is up here. All of this going on up here is what's causing me the most physical discomfort. This area is not good either. I hate this, but I'm mainly worried about this.
He also goes one step further and explains how he opposes the death of the symbol of the self. But then came along humans with their science. A man is meant to follow his spirit. Science wants to put everything under a thing called the microscope. There's no good or evil behind the scope anymore. I don't know if it could be more obvious than this. Kalev is telling us that science and reason, the microscope, are not tools for measuring good and evil. We require something else, be it our moral intuition or the religious belief. What Kalev called the spirit. He opposes the death of the symbol of the self and is also calling out what the new gods are trying to accomplish with Project Logic. Kalev has one more thing to him, I think. He reminds me of the Gospel of Judas from Gnostic scriptures. In a nutshell, and yes, I'm gonna butcher this up for the sake of retention, Gnosticism is a set of religious beliefs that emerged alongside early Christianity. The main difference is that the Gnostics believed that the material world was created by an evil god called the Demiurge, and we could be saved from it by acquiring knowledge of the spiritual world, a process called gnosis. In said Gospel of Judas, Judas is not portrayed as the betrayer of Jesus, but as his closest disciple. Jesus tells him, "You will exceed all of them, or you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." According to the Gospel, Jesus asked Judas to betray him in order to fulfill a divine plan, allowing Jesus to escape the material world and return to the spiritual realm, which is in line with Gnostic teachings. If you believe any of this at all is up to you. The reason I'm sharing this here is to see how the themes relate back to fear and hunger. Just as Alll-mer is the psychological Jesus, I believe that Kalev is the Judas depicted in the Gnostic Gospel. This would explain his infatuation and somewhat loyalty to Alll-mer, despite leaving his side. Alright, it's about time we close this video. Let's put into perspective everything we've learned. I want to present you my own version of the Skin Bible of Alll-mer, with the theories I presented today. Again, please keep it in mind that this is not canon and I'm just a theorist. But if we do get more info about Alll-mer in the future, let's see how much of it holds true. Once upon a time, the right-hand woman of the goddess of creation was tasked with bringing life to a new species, one that would surpass the one that came before it, and share the same light as the goddess herself. Thus, humanity was born. However, as the first draft, it was inevitably flawed and full of imperfections. To mend these mistakes, the legendary progenitor sought to create a new human, one aligned with her vision. She acquired the seed of the god of destruction and used it in her next design, and that's how Alll-mer came to be. Alll-mer was a unique man of unmatched wisdom and allure. He embodied all that humanity aspired to become, the highest ideal of self. His teachings of unity and peace shook the foundations of the new world order. Soon, he gained many followers, which, in turn, attract many enemies. In secrecy, Alll-mer entrusted one of his apostles to betray him when the time was right, so he could rise as a martyr and become the symbol of hope the people so desperately needed. And thus the story unfolded. Alll-mer was captured, humiliated, and eventually crucified, but this suffering was precisely what he had intended. He soared to the heavens, reaching his destination, Mahabre, the city of the gods. Dormant in the Golden City were remnants of the god of the sun and order. The exact events that transpired remain a mystery, perhaps known only to those who witnessed it, but the result is clear. Alll-mer absorbed the traces of the old god and used them to fuel his ascension. However, just this power was not enough for him. Alll-mer sought absolution, for within him stirred the seed of temptation and evil. He believed he needed to rid himself of this darkness in order to become a true savior. But that belief would prove to be his greatest mistake. During the 3 days and 3 nights he spent in Mahabre, Alll-mer sculpted an idol of himself and gave it a name. That was when Alll-mer ceased to be, and how Algiz and Sulfur were born, the eagle and the shadow. The two forces fought, with the shadow being defeated and buried deep within the sulfuric pits, to prevent it from interfering with the newfound order. Algiz returned from the Golden City, but he was no longer the beacon of hope the people had expected. Instead, he became a force of terror and domination. He was no longer Alll-mer, the god of convergence, but Algiz, the god of tyranny. The tyrant god subjugated all powers in the land, displaying his absolute dominion over the lesser new gods. He left a permanent scar on history before his sudden, unannounced departure. Although people united under a single banner, it was not out of goodness in their hearts, but out of sheer dread for their lives. The world had merely traded many small tyrants for the greatest one of them all, and the lasting effects of his reign still echo in modern times. Meanwhile, Sulfur, shadow of Alll-mer and the god of anarchy, continues to burn with his deep hatred down below the sulfuric pits. Through his dim influence, he was able to touch the hearts of those crushed by Algiz's relentless domination, for, as it is said, no tree can grow to heaven until its roots reach down to hell. Those who heard the voice of the forsaken shadow became preachers of his gospel, spreading pain and death to bring the world closer, step by step, to the sulfuric pits. Thus, the return of the vengeful sulfuric sun is foretold. Perhaps the greatest tragedy lies in the realization that the once perfect man, Alll-mer, saw the very thing that made him human as a flaw, a mere accidental lack of perfection, and sought to destroy it. Unaware of the mistake in his belief, he led himself and the world into ruin. The light at the end of the tunnel turned out to be a train, and we all have been caught in this sorrowful crash. Amen. If you made this far into the video, I will assume that you enjoyed it. So please consider subscribing for more videos like this in the future. It sure helps a lot. The video is over, but I want to use this remaining space to share a few words. This video took a lot of work, and I hope it shows. I tried to be mindful of the suggestions you guys made in my last video, and I hope this one can be considered an improvement. Once again, a shout out to Max Derrat. This video literally wouldn't exist if it wasn't for his Aion series. I think it would be pretty nice if this video reached him, but please don't annoy the man. If he doesn't want to watch it, it's okay, really. What else? Oh yeah. Next video probably won't be about Fiendhunger, and I say probably because there's the chance of Myro finally releasing the update. And if that happens, I mean, I have to make a video covering it. But aside from that, it will be about another game. Don't worry, I'm not out of ideas for Fiendhunger videos yet. So when the next video come out, please give it a chance, you know? You might like it, even if you don't know the game. Anyways, I think that's it for now. See you soon, hopefully.